Well, a lot of people being selected as potential top officials in the new Trump administration are from Florida. The incoming president has already named North Florida's Susie Wiles his chief of staff, Hillsborough County's Pam Bondi as his attorney general, Senator Marco Rubio for Secretary of State, Daytona Beach area Congressman Mike Waltz for National Security Advisor, and former Florida Congressman Dave Weldon, a vaccine skeptic, to head the Centers for Disease Control. One of his other Florida choices, Hillsborough County Sheriff Chad Chronister, was to head the Drug Enforcement Administration, but he has already withdrawn his name from consideration. And one other Floridian could be named, depending on what happens to Fox News personality Pete Hegseth, Trump's first choice to become Secretary of Defense. Hegseth is facing allegations of excessive drinking and mistreatment of women, and Florida's Governor Ron DeSantis is being tagged by some as a possible replacement for Hegseth. So, Mitch, let's talk about Hegseth and DeSantis. How likely is it that DeSantis might be chosen over Hegseth, since DeSantis' name has been floated out there the last week?
Yeah, that was pretty wild that his name came up, and it looks like that is authorized for the Trump camp putting him out there, so it's not idle speculation. As we tape on Friday, it looks like Hegseth and Trump are behind him, Hegseth standing firm and trying to get through this process. Of course, the confirmation hearings won't be for another month, so who knows what story's going to land in the next few weeks when it comes to Pete Hegseth. So I think, Ron DeSantis really can't act or do anything. As we know, he hasn't talked about this publicly at all, and it puts him in an interesting position here. I think, no doubt, on paper, he's a better qualified candidate, frankly, than Pete Hegseth. He has run this big organization called the state of Florida for the last 6 years. He was a JAG lawyer in the Navy, and he doesn't have nearly the, politically, I mean, he's controversial, obviously, with Democrats, but he doesn't have the stuff that Hegseth is being followed with. So we'll have to wait and see, obviously.
Eric, what do you make of all these selections? A lot of these selections are people that appear frequently on Fox News. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I saw one columnist say, we're being governed by a Fox News grandpa, and that's pretty much what's happening. He's watching these shows. But when he was president before, he was notorious for calling Sean Hannity after Hannity's show was over and discussing policies. So this is not necessarily something that's new. What's been interesting about this, for all the bloviating people have said about the irrelevance of traditional media, the reason Hegseth's nomination is in trouble is because of reporting by traditional media. We've seen blockbuster stories in The New Yorker, The New York Times, The Washington Post, NBC News. Just in the 10 days or so, 2 weeks maybe, that we knew that he was going to be suggested to be the Secretary of Defense. We've seen detailed reporting that allegations about drinking and about toxic work environments and about badly mismanaging two nonprofits that he headed. And he's just supposedly filling out the paperwork for an FBI background check now. So we may see even more revelations after that gets going. So that's the power of traditional media still, to uncover things that, frankly, are making the Senate think twice about whether they want to confirm it.
Ray, what do you think of the other nominations, the president-elect's selections?
I'm with Mitch. As we tape here, it's ironic that there's 45 days left until the inauguration, and we're thinking about 45, now 47, doing all this stuff, the chaos of a Trump presidency. But I mean, the other stuff, thinking about Pam Bondi, I think anybody who's been around for any amount of time feels something, maybe even warmth, to see somebody locally ascend to that position. That's the Attorney General. That's a huge deal. And I think as a local person, you feel a little bit of pride, but as a news person, you think about that $25,000 donation to her PAC long ago, and then all of a sudden an investigation into Trump University is dropped. You can't ignore that. And we should say that I think a committee cleared her of any wrongdoing of that. But what does that say about how that department's going to run?
She's also called for the deportation of students that protest the Israeli action in Gaza.
Yeah, and it's funny, I think yesterday was the first anniversary of the Tampa 5 having their charges more or less dropped by Susie Lopez, and Susie's office has been quiet on that. But what does that look like? What does dissent look like? What does it look like for media going forward? Eric brought up a great point about all this great reporting that's happening, but I think about Brett Kavanaugh and stuff. We live in this country where these kinds of allegations obviously didn't matter to voters anymore, right? I like your optimism. Perhaps maybe the Senate will care.
They mattered to. They may have mattered to a lot of voters, just not enough.
Right. So, hopefully in the confirmation hearings we see something. But
Mitch, let me ask you about Sheriff Chronister. He backed out from heading the DEA this week, saying that he's committed to staying in Hillsborough County. And let me put up what President Trump posted this week on Wednesday after Chronister pulled out. Trump said, he didn't pull out. I pulled him out because I did not like what he said to my pastors and other supporters. Across conservative media and even in Republican circles this week, there was the allegation that Chronister somehow was too hard on pastors locally over the COVID restrictions. That's not exactly what Chronister did.
No, and this happened 4 years ago, and like you think there's a thing called Google that the Trump transition team could look at. I mean, he's acting like we just heard about this the last 3 days. The whole thing is kind of weird, okay? And I don't know who to believe here because somebody's not telling the truth about who backed down. But yes, we saw some conservative opposition to Chad Chronister being announced, and he backed down. But I don't know if that's what led him to go away, or Donald Trump said you're going away. It's just kind of
because
confusing.
the story is he eventually met with the minister and then he backed away from enforcing the COVID
You're correct. Chad Chronister got heat from Republicans when he did this in March of 2020, and he did have lunch when the case was still pending in front of Hillsborough County State Attorney Andrew Warren at the time. Now the case was dropped and everybody was moved along here. So that was controversial back then. Chad Chronister, it's been known that he's given to Democrats financially, but he hasn't in the last 4 years. He was with Ron DeSantis when they suspended Andrew Warren side by side. So he's been a good Republican of late because the criticism, again, of Chad Chronister has been sometimes from people who think he's been conservative enough. And I can't believe that the Trump people didn't know that beforehand.
And Janelle, you wanted to make a point about that.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it just goes to show how long the memory in the MAGAverse is, right? Like, it doesn't matter if he went, oh, that made people mad, and he did an about face and got more conservative. What they see is what happened 4 years ago, not what happened after that. And it's worth noting that pastor endorsed him, supported him for being head of the DEA. So if that guy's not mad about it, what's the deal with all the other guys? That's just once you've been labeled rhino, you're always rhino.
Well, I also think it may have been about loyalty above everything. The one thing you can say about all these people who've been nominated is that there is no question how loyal they are to Trump and how loyal they are to MAGA, except for him.